Teaching is hard, and oftentimes it isn't what happens in the classroom that makes the job difficult. It's what happens before and after school, during passing periods, at lunch, in meetings, or in our lives outside of school that challenges our ability to stick with the profession. TeacherGuard is committed to focusing on making teaching sustainable and enjoyable. We want to make the rewards of the profession seem more attainable and the challenges more bearable. Our mentorship model pairs teachers with consistent daily support from a peer educator. Through TeacherGuard's four sustainability principles, we will walk the challenging times with you and allow you to enjoy the wins and celebrations that come with this beautiful profession. See teacherguard.net for more information and to explore how you can join our community of educators today. We hope you enjoy today's podcast.
All right, welcome back. Really happy to be joined today by a relatively newer teacher to the profession, Michael Miller. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Adam, for having me. I'm doing well. Just got out of school myself, so fresh on the mind.
Yeah, and really appreciate again you being on after a long day. I'm sure the first thing you want to do is just relax and not talk more about teaching, but we're here, so I want to
Sure.
pick your brain a bit. Let's just start off by having you describe a little about your background. What got you into teaching? What are you teaching now? And yeah, anything you want to share about yourself?
Yeah, totally. So I'm based out of California, went to college at UC Santa Cruz, got my undergrad in astronomy, and realized it wasn't for me. It wasn't social. It wasn't as engaging as I wanted it to be, at least for myself. Pivoted to teaching, got my master's at Stanford in education, and then been in the Bay Area ever since. I think what got me into it was just being able to have a different experience every day, right? New challenges, new fires every day. But it's really been an awesome and rewarding journey.
It's wonderful. And so you mentioned did you say this was your first or your second year teaching?
I apologize. This is actually my fifth year, so I do
Fifth
have a
year
little bit
teaching.
of experience, but definitely I've seen a lot of the trends of newer teachers. I've lived it, and I am still learning so much. I still feel new in a lot
Yeah.
of what I do.
Yeah, I don't think that that feeling goes away. Yeah, I still feel like it's still day one. So, um with your almost 5 years of experience now, thinking about the challenges that you faced maybe early on in your career that you've seen your colleagues face, when thinking about teacher sustainability, what is one, maybe two things that you feel are the most challenging to teachers in staying in the profession?
You know, it's a little embarrassing to say because I'm not the person to say this, but it's spreading yourself too thin, right? That like
Mm.
we feel such a commitment to do it all and be everything to everyone, especially to our students, right? Am I failing them by not doing enough every day? And I'm still figuring it out. I'm still trying to figure out my own balance, but I see that just manifest all the time with burnout in the first couple years, and it's always really scary.
Do you think that's a product of teachers feel like they have to do that in order to ensure that they can retain their jobs, that they can come back to their same placement? Or do you feel that's more of just an internal quality that a lot of people have that then kind of meshes with joining education and you're being asked to do a lot of different things? So is it more of a personality thing or more of a job demand that you think leads to that?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I feel like I can speak for my context, and make some assumptions more broadly. But within my context, I would say it's absolutely that we have a lot of passionate people enter that door. And then I think what we broadly see happen is that education is in a rough spot in terms of funding, in terms of what resources kids have access to. And because we see this challenge in education and we're living it every day, we feel like we need to rise even higher and like, okay, maybe the kid isn't getting support from this person, so I'm going to be doubly as good for them within the classroom.
Mm.
And we see that not just with our students, but also with extracurriculars and everything else that educators get involved in one way or another. I think there are a lot of system level things that we could think about on how we make this more sustainable, honestly.
It's interesting that you bring that up, the caring about the student, right? Because oftentimes We associate that with, good teachers care about their kids and their needs, and they customize their lesson plans to account for all of that needs, aptitudes, and so forth. But I don't think that, or I would say more rarely, we associate it with like, well, that actually can burn a teacher out, because if you have 30 kids times 5, 6 periods, that's a lot of different needs to account for to try to be everything for everyone. And so it's interesting that you bring that up, because the solution obviously is not to just stop telling people, like, stop caring, standardize everything. But there has to be some kind of middle ground, I assume, where you also are taking care of the person that ultimately is taking care of the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you have it right in this idea that it really starts from you, right? Like, I need to be okay myself before I'm able to support anyone else in the classroom, outside the classroom. And so what we end up seeing happening is we overextend. We're not caring for ourselves in the way that we need to. And then ultimately, it causes us to be frustrated, to have these challenges that we say, you know what, I can't do this anymore.
Hmm.
Um, I think the only way that I've survived as long as I have, and honestly thrived, in some ways at least, is by being able to first center my own needs and recognize, oh, I can't do more with the kids right now because I'm dealing with something personally, or there are real things that I need to address for myself first. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm
uh,
curious about your take on on the role of administration there. Not necessarily your own administration, but I'm thinking at some of the principals and assistant principals that I had in my career who I considered the most supportive. They were the ones who were pretty clear about, you got to take care of yourself, right? And you got to make sure that your family is in a good place so that you can come to work being everything that you can be for the students. And it's not to say that I had administrators that didn't feel that way, but I certainly had some who were more overly communicative about that than others. And just hearing that, I think one of the teachers or principles is this idea of uncertainty. When you are uncertain about the priorities of administration in this case, you may be thinking, I need to completely fix the world, or I'm not coming back next year, or I'm not doing my job. So maybe speak to that a little bit. What role do you feel leadership administration plays in our own ability to take care of ourselves?
yeah, absolutely. I think that speaking of that idea of uncertainty, when the goals are clear and the expectations are clear, it does make things feel a lot more achievable, and that you can measure essentially your success, right? Like, hey, we're trying to do this thing. This is the goal. And when the expectation is just, yeah, you need to solve this problem and it's vague or that it's uncertain, and especially if admin is maybe not communicative about tangible goals, then it can really feel like, okay, well, I just need to do everything I can and hope that that's enough rather than really measure how things are progressing. I've been really thankful for my admin team as well as my department as well. I think that that kind of camaraderie around, like, what are we trying to do this year and what are the goals, has really helped me understand, my own challenges, but also my own successes, because it's measurable and it is certain compared to the vagueness of do your best.
Yeah. Well, you know where you stand, right? And I think that's not to say that we need to know absolutely every little detail about everything, for lack of a better term, have every piece of the puzzle in our corner. Uh, but I think that there is a degree of uncertainty with which we can operate, and then there's a degree with which we just collapse, right? And there is value in being mature enough to say, I'm not going to know everything. I'm not going to know everything that my colleagues, my administrators know, but I am also not going to assume that I know. And as a result, put myself in a position where I'm now going to burn myself out because I'm assuming that that's what somebody wants or doesn't want. And I think as a newer teacher, that's challenging to, not necessarily because of a lack of maturity, but simply because you want to do everything you can to make sure you can come back next year.
Right.
So,
And I appreciate your nuance on, like, we're not gonna know everything about everything, absolutely. There is always gonna be some level of uncertainty, and really embracing that and just saying, like, that it's okay that I don't know everything about what this year's gonna entail, and I'm going to accept that there's gonna be bumps and hurdles,
mhm.
and successes that are really surprising. But then also having some kind of thing that I can look towards as, "Hey, this is where I wanna go."
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think there is when we don't know everything, right? We try to fill in the gaps, and oftentimes that leads to more problems because, for instance, as a first year teacher, or if I'm walking into my classroom and I'm getting ready to teach, and my students are kind of loud coming in, maybe they're not settling down, and then I see my AP walk through the hallway and he looked over and maybe he had his sunglasses on and I didn't see a reaction, but I saw that he saw the classroom. Immediately my mind goes to like, oh man, like I'm going to be reprimanded. My kids were loud, my classroom management may look like it wasn't in place, when in fact that person may have walked by, looked in their direction, and was looking at a poster on the wall or was looking at something on the door, never even peeked inside the classroom. And now I've constructed this whole scenario in my head that's going to carry on with me too. I'm going to go home. I'm going to keep thinking about this. It's going to stress me out. I'm not going to get good sleep tomorrow. Now I'm going to have a bad teaching day. So it is there something to that rollover effect of our own minds just spinning out and causing anxiety that sometimes is not even there.
Oh, totally. Like, I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've learned as an educator is the difference between, I don't even know about the difference in framing between a really challenging situation and a really puzzling situation. Promise there's an article that I totally read that did this that I'm not remembering the name of, but it is really awesome and powerful to think about, why is this student not meeting my expectations? And I'm really puzzled by that problem, because it's still something that I want to address. It's not that I'm just letting this slide, but I also acknowledge that I don't know everything about this. I'm puzzled by what interactions I'm having with this kid, because I think that maybe I'm being really clear to them about expectations and how we navigate the class. But clearly, there's some kind of puzzle, some kind of question about what's actually being communicated and understood and what's manifesting in the classroom. And that's helped me really unpack some of my own challenges where I'm like, no, it's not that I'm opposed to this kid. I'm just puzzled by them. I'm curious. I want to know, why are we disconnected in this way?
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite quotes, I might butcher it because I haven't seen it in a while, but it's this idea of the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it's happened,
Hmm.
right? Because we assume we said something to someone and as a result, they understood it, right? And they looked at me in the eye, they nodded. We are walking away and we are both having the same expectation for what is to happen next. And then all of a sudden that kid turns around and slaps someone in the face, and you're like, what happened? I thought we were in agreement with what the expectation was here. And it is such a false sense of security to think that talking about something once is sufficient communication.
Totally.
I have a coach that tells me all the time, you can never over communicate. Try it. I dare you. It's not possible, right? And it's not even possible amongst adults, let alone teaching. Like I think of how many times do emails come through and everybody gets a different perspective of an email that came out, right?
Right.
And why does that happen? Because we're all reading it with different contexts, with different levels of attention, with different time of day. Uh, so all of that just kind of blends into all of the principles that the mentorship program at Teacher Yard offers essentially rely on communication and how well of or how good of a job are we doing of saying what we mean, meaning what we say, and then continuing to say it over and over again. And I think for a new teacher that doesn't necessarily get as much face time with their supervisor, with their department chairs, with their colleagues, that can be challenging because you have to frame your actions based on limited interaction and then fill in the rest yourself. So,
Absolutely wish that in my first years I had recognized that, because I think when you tell a kid, like, I'm a physics person, I'm going to use the example of you drop a ball and it falls to the ground. I have a picture in my mind of what that means, and it's all based around like my physics being applied.
mm-hmm.
But a kid thinks about that. What does the ball shape? What do we mean it drops to the ground? Like all of these things are going to be different for 32 humans in a classroom, right?
Yeah. I mean, draw a cell, right? I remember being a student and being introduced to this concept of a cell in biology. We always, this make me sound dumb, but we always drew it on a two-dimensional piece of paper. So I imagined a cell like a pancake almost, right? Like it was flat and all the organelles was sitting on top of it because that's how we drew them. And then everybody kind of navigated on top of what looked like a little island. So the first time that I saw an image of a cell in a textbook and it looked like a sphere and you couldn't see inside because there was a membrane outside of it, it just didn't sit with me. And it took me forever. And I remember spending an entire class looking at that. And we were talking, the teacher was probably talking about something related to organelle functions. I wasn't listening at all because I was so fixed on what I thought a cell looked like is not what this picture is saying. Is the picture wrong? Am I wrong? Was my teacher wrong? And if you have 30 different minds in a classroom thinking 30 different things while instruction is happening, there is no way, we can ever move forward comfortably thinking we're all on the same page. So to your point about the ball example there, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with, I've taught this and I don't know how it's sat with all of the minds that are in this room? It's challenging. And I think a lot of times for a newer teacher, when you're pressed to, you just got to get to the next standard and you got to get to the next assessment. One of the reasons why sometimes you see more management issues at the beginning and at the end of the year is because you've lost those students that you kept moving on from. And now it's been February and those kids are still trying to wrestle with content that happened in September or October. So maybe speak to that a little bit in the classroom. How is that a challenge for teaching to know that as the year progresses, time does not slow and yet everybody's at a different place?
Yeah. No, I struggle with that still, absolutely. Um, I think there's the real challenge of not only am I getting this concept, but like, am I okay getting this concept today, right? Like, am I mentally here? Am I physically here? Like, everything needs to align for me to really deeply understand a concept within a 1 day time span. And so, you mentioned earlier this idea of like you try to over communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to do if you actually tried.
Yeah.
And circling back on things is just so important. And then I think what also just helps is having that one on one with students where you can. It's so hard to find the time sometimes. I think that something I've been thinking on lately is how do I create accountability within groups rather than me be the point of accountability for
Mm.
students.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the sense of, hey, Jose hasn't been here yesterday. Maybe we should help him catch up rather than me having to do all of it.
Yeah.
And trying to find ways to navigate that. But absolutely, as we can progress through the year, it becomes more challenging for that reason because we're continuing to build, we're continuing to try to develop something here. But when we have a student who doesn't have the foundational understandings yet, it can be really hard to just ask them, hey, jump to the next level by tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where this idea of intentional groupings comes into place, right? I remember early on in my career, a lot of times I did random groupings because it's less work, right? It's less prep. You just kind of do the popsicle stick thing where you pick a number and then that's your group or something like that. But then what ends up happening is when you want to set up structures like what you just spoke about, where you are asking them to figure something out, come up with a potential idea for a solution to a problem, and you've created a group where three folks agree and one disagrees, that one is not going to argue necessarily if they don't have the personality to do so. They're not going to argue strongly for their idea. They're going to assume that numbers win, and as a result, you've now squashed a perspective that may have been correct, right? Simply because of a lack of purpose behind the way I grouped my students. So can you speak to that a little bit? The value of thinking about that as the year progresses and you get to know your kids a little more, how every interaction in the classroom that you can govern, it's really crucial that you do.
Totally. I actually really like the example of randomized grouping because boy, I've tried every type of grouping, just to see what happens. And I think that idea of randomized grouping, you're like, oh, well, you're all friends. And so
Yeah.
hopefully, like, y'all can just chat and hang and
Yep.
think through ideas together. But what we are assuming in that is that the friend dynamic is one that also really works well for learning. And I'm not even saying that from like oh, are they going to have good behaviors in the class? But that example of I disagree with all my friends, but now I have even more social pressure to conform within my group, possibly, than if I was just with three people who I'm not worried about how they're going to feel at lunch when I told them I disagreed. Um, and so I think that there is a lot to be said about like understanding who your kid is and then being able to sort out like okay, this student needs this within the classroom to be successful, or this student excels at this topic or this style of communication, even. Because what I've also seen is some students are really strong academically, but it can be a challenge for them to communicate in ways that are helpful to others. So
Mm,
just because you're an A student doesn't mean that you're going to be the best person to group with someone who needs a lot of support. Uh, Oftentimes, I find that that doesn't work out very well because there's such a disconnect in the needs of students and what they can provide to each other. And so I think really understanding your relationship with a student in order to gauge like what do you need and what can you give to our community is really important to making the best and making the most of your time because it's so short day by day.
Well, and thinking about what you're asking the students to do when you're grouping, right? I've made the mistake of grouping with the intent of classroom management in mind, right? I just need these four kids can never work together because they won't get anything done. And that's not okay. That's not an okay mindset to take because I am belittling whatever academic contribution they can bring. And
Mhm.
it might be that they can work together if the task is appropriate for them to work on. So those are all things that when talking about sustainability in teaching, oftentimes a teacher can lure themselves into thinking, I'm not doing a great job because my groupings never work, right? That it must be me. I'm the problem. I'm not good at this. This isn't my thing. I'm leaving the profession. Not just grouping, anything within the classroom. And so I wonder how much of that plays a role when the teacher becomes their own evaluator in real time and makes a determination that is incorrect, that they are not apt for teaching simply because they were utilizing the incorrect tool at the incorrect time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you bringing up your perspective on that because absolutely like it is so important to have a meaningful task. Because I've sat in my own classroom being like, "All right, why aren't we talking to each
hmm
other? What did I do wrong?" And
Yep.
what really it is they just don't have a task that feels meaningful or relevant or honestly sometimes rigorous enough where it's like, "Yeah, we get it. Like we don't need to talk about this anymore."
hmm
And to the point of like a group of guys who are all friends, if you do end up separating them, like, just to support your point, if you end up separating them, they're probably not gonna be down to, like, actually engage in class more after that. They're not gonna be like, "Cool, now I'm ready to learn." Um, and so that idea of, like, having a task that they're interested in and, like, actively want to, like, collaborate and collaboration is kind of built into the question because I don't know the full answer. My group mates don't know the full answer, but we can get to an answer together. And seeing the value in that is so like genuinely useful. I think on a even bigger note, it helps us understand why community is so important
Hmm.
and the value of community. Because oftentimes we can talk about classroom communities, but to make it feel like one, I think you do need authentic group work so so that students really feel why community is such an important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I landed on that realization in my first year teaching. Remember, we were doing peer observations, and I observed this veteran teacher, and I saw some of my students in her class, and it was like I was looking at different human beings. I was like, you do not engage the same way in my science class that you do in this math class, right? Was it maybe the structure that the teacher had? Was it maybe the content that they were interested in? It was probably a combination of all those things. But to your point about community, each classroom is a different community. And just like we outside of school, in whatever communities we belong to, we behave differently to different extents, right? Depending on who we're with. The students do as well. And so I think that for a newer teacher who is being really hard on themselves is really important for them to listen, to hear the idea that your students are not reacting necessarily just to you. They are reacting to the physical environment in which they're in, to the other students who are in that environment. They are reacting to how their mornings went before they got to school. It's almost like we have to remember we are such a small part of their days,
Mhm.
and yet they are the entirety of ours because our job is to teach them. And that disconnect can mess with people's minds at times, can mess with our minds. It sure as heck messed with mine. And it took me a long time to realize it's not about me, right? It's not always about me. Um, what are your thoughts on that idea of this idea of it's not about you? Like
Yeah,
to put it
totally.
as simple, right?
Yeah. Um, yeah, that one's big. It's such a big thing to unpack, right? Because you do so much, like, and I'm not trying to say like, oh, I'm doing all of this for the
Hmm.
kids, but this is your job, right? Like you are kind of doing this for the kids, because you're paid to do it, like figure it out and get it all ready to go for the kids. And so to also step back and say, actually, even though I did all this work and I planned this out and I have all of these ideas on how it's going to work out, it's not about me. It's about understanding where a kid is at day by day and understanding that they're coming in with this, uh, like just wherever they're at within this day, is really hard
Hmm.
because oftentimes you get wrapped up in the idea of like, okay, I built the lesson. I understand where we're headed. I know where we're going to go. And it's all kind of focused around my own ideas about what I need to do rather than about what are kids experiencing and how does the way that they're coming in today affect that?
Hmm.
Um, I think as well, connecting it back to what we were talking about earlier, that idea of community, while classroom community only exists for, no, it exists outside of the 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 80 minutes, whatever your time frame is. When you feel that for those 80 minutes that you're like actually in that class, I think that that helps create a more, uh, consistent space, right? One where every time I come in, I feel more comfortable, hopefully. And that helps us then create those cultures of, hey, I'm gonna like do my work and like try to learn something today because I feel comfortable enough in this space to do that. And oftentimes when we are like, man, we create these narratives about our kids, right? This kid can do work. This kid can't do work. When we create these storylines, we're not really fully understanding why is a student not doing the work today. And oftentimes it is just, there is something else. This is just a part of their life and a part of who they, not, sorry, let me be really clear about this. Definitely don't want to misconstrue this is a sliver of their day. They have so much else going on. Um, and them not doing work within a classroom space isn't defining them. It is just a behavior because of all the other factors that are going on way beyond the classroom. So
Yeah.
just understanding where that comes from and building those relationships is so helpful for that.
I love that point you made about that idea of defining things, right? About making definitive statements about a child who is changing every day.
Mhm.
And so when we box a kid into this is what they can or can't do, we are saying they're not going to develop anymore. This is where and that's for us to have that perspective as the teacher in the room is incredibly dangerous. And so as tough as it can be to this idea of remaining flexible, of remaining optimistic, that even that you're in day 180 of the school year, and that student may still be able to turn things around. That I think helps teachers remain in the profession, that spirit of it can be done. As we close up here, I like to finish up these podcasts by asking folks, in your case, you're in year 5, say that we're approaching the end of the year here, say somebody would come to you, they're in their first year teaching, and they're like, hey, I don't think I'm going to stick with this. I think I'm going to go take a year off next year and then maybe look at a different profession. What are one or two things that you would share with that teacher who is considering making a change?
I would definitely be interested in asking them questions just about what their perspective are, but really ask about like what kind of connections have you made in this profession? Because oftentimes either it's I'm trying to make all the connections and I've made none because I don't put myself into anything fully because I don't have the energy or mental space to do that, or the reverse where it's I haven't been able to connect at all because I'm just so overwhelmed with everything. And I can't work in this space anymore because I have no connection. I have no lifeline. And so, my recommendation to them, if they were still open to teaching, would be to talk to people and try to build community for themselves. I am so grateful to the people in my life, in my job, that make it a little bit more than a job, you know? Uh, I don't glamorize jobs, but this is one of those times where I'm like, the people in it are what keep me sane and what keep me healthy and happy.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael, for the time you gave me here today, for joining the podcast. Really appreciate your time, man.
Well, thank you as well, Adam. I really appreciate being on.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful to your teaching journey, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube or through your favorite podcast platform. We also appreciate any and all reviews or comments you leave. Thank you for joining us today and tune in next week for our next episode.